certainly delighted to spend a few minutes with you all this morning. I think we're scheduled for about an hour. I'm going to talk for a little while and talk about the work of our Student Success Center here at ACC. And then hopefully we can have some questions and some dialogue around the work, and address any questions that you may have. So as Jesse said, ACC, Arkansas Community Colleges, it's the membership association for all 22 community colleges in Arkansas. And so historically we've done the state policy work for our community colleges, worked with the legislature to make sure that state policy is to our liking, but we have also branched off into many other activities, and one of the activities is the Center for Student Success. And so, Terrence, I don't see the first, oh, here it is, fantastic, thank you. So we started the center in 2010, and we started it with a grant for the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation, who is a foundation here in Arkansas. Y'all are probably familiar with them. They've funded many projects across the state. And so the mission for the center, the vision for the center was to really provide a focal point for helping the colleges, our member colleges, improve outcomes for students. And so back around this time, 2010, many of y'all remember this, I'm sure, that we started to, within the higher ed world, shift our focus from enrollment to student success. And so, there was growing emphasis on outcomes that students were achieving in our institutions. And we felt like here at ACC that we needed to provide some sort of mechanism to help our colleges with that work, because as y'all know, it's difficult work. And so part of the vision was to develop, share, and scale innovative institutional practices. And so the bulk of my activities here at the center and the work that we do really involves working with our institutions, our colleges, and helping them develop, learn from each other, and scale practices that have an impact on student success. And then, of course, we also raise federal and private grants to support the work at the colleges. We don't really get typically state resources to support innovation at the college level. And so there was a recognition here when we created the center that, we needed to bring in federal grants, private grants to support this innovation work at the institution level. And we've been pretty successful. The last tally that I came up with was about $22 million that we've raised since 2010 to work with our institutions on various projects. And then, of course, part of the mission for the center is to look at federal and state policy, primarily state policy, but federal policy too, to make sure that it's supporting the work that we're doing at the institution level. And y'all know that public policy can either support the work that you do, or it can be a barrier to the work that you do. And so we try and keep an eye on, as we do the institution work, an eye on, how is state and federal policy supporting that work or inhibiting that work, and what can we do to change policy to better support the institution work. And the other thing I'll say quickly about the background with the center is, and the history of it and how we got started, was it actually grew out of the career pathways work that we had done at the association here. And there's a bunch of two-year college folks on this call, and every two-year college has a career pathways program. And I was actually involved in getting that started back in about 2003. But it's really a student success initiative, and it provides advising to students, and then it provides wraparound support services. But the outcomes are actually remarkable for that program at our two-year colleges. We've done independent studies with private foundations, and it's been pretty heavily evaluated. And essentially the completion rates for students who are connected to that initiative are almost twice what they are for your average community college student in Arkansas. So, you know, we knew with that initiative that proactive student success efforts could work, and we wanted a way to sort of build on that work and help our institutions move beyond that work and do more activities to support students and better outcomes for students. But that was sort of the impetus, was the Career Pathways program that was, you know, back in 2003, and then us at the association thinking about a way to sustain that kind of work with our institutions and build on it and move forward. Next slide, Terrence, please. So some of the projects that we've been involved in, I know our two-year college folks on the call are familiar with probably all of these, but I just wanted to hit some of the bigger initiatives and sort of give you the sense of the scope of the work that we do with our institutions. So we back in about, I guess it was 2012, we actually got a large TAC grant from the federal government to the tune of about $15 million, and we had all of our community colleges involved in that project. And we worked on developmental education reform. We had all 22 of our schools adopt the accelerated learning program, which is essentially a co-requisite remedial program. Y'all are probably familiar with it. It started at Baltimore County Community College, but we had all of our schools replicate that work. We also had the schools change how they did remedial math. And back then, the popular reform work was really about modularizing the content of math courses and putting students in front of computers and doing self-paced learning. Interestingly enough, that wasn't didn't work out as well, certainly as the ALP work had worked out for our schools. But as you all know, a lot of this work, this institutional change work, it's not always successful, but at least it's informative at the end, and we learned quite a bit from that work. We also looked at helping students improve their placement through remedial efforts that took place before the semester started, and then we did a lot of work around academic programs and trying to streamline those programs, reduce credit hours, look at things like hybrid instruction. Reducing seat time, things like that. And we actually worked with Complete College America quite a bit on that grant application. And so we used a lot of you guys are probably familiar with their game changers, work. They have all sorts of publications about practices at the institution level that can be game changers and change outcomes for students. And so we had put in quite a few of those CCA game changers into that initiative. And then we got some Kresge Foundation funding. We really focused on institutional research capacity building at our two-year schools. And we tried to put in place SAS data marts that would essentially improve our institutions' capacity to track data and mine data and report data. And we had some success with that. And then we had institutional effectiveness institutes where we had folks come in and talk about best practices for how you, assess the effectiveness of your overall college. And that was some pretty valuable work, I think, as well. And then we had a project that was really about student financial security. This was the Working Student Success Network. And what happens with a lot of our initiatives is we have groups of colleges that participate. I think we had 4 colleges that participated in this work. But this was really about looking at students and trying to stabilize their lives outside of college for the most part. So we got into things like financial coaching. We had some schools that built food pantries. Schools looked at other ways to meet the basic needs of students. There was a lot of emphasis on trying to connect students to public benefits if they were eligible. And so that work is been very exciting from my perspective. because a lot of times the students that we get at our community colleges have those basic needs. And I think it's a role of community colleges to be thinking about how we can try and support students in those ways, because ultimately it's going to help them be successful students. And then we got into a program called the Academy for College Excellence with a few of our colleges, where it was an effective intervention is what it was, and it really was an intervention geared towards students that come from generational poverty backgrounds, trauma backgrounds, and it was a pretty interesting initiative that we worked on with a group of our colleges. And at the end of the day, it was helpful to students, but it was something that was hard to scale, which is one of the challenges that we often have with some of the work that we do with our institutions. And then we got into iBest replication. I think y'all might be familiar with iBest. It's something that was pioneered in Washington State, but it basically tries to put students in vocational career and technical education type programs, short-term programs, and then provide the remediation that might be needed in an embedded way within those vocational programs. So it's integrated basic instruction. It's worked well for harder to serve populations, and we had a bunch of schools that got involved with that work and are still doing it, thankfully, and it's really become an initiative of the state adult education program at this point, but they're still actively supporting it. And then, Terrence, next slide. Then we moved on to our guided pathways work, and I'm sure y'all have heard this. This is like one of the hot terms in higher ed reform right now, guided pathways. And we got a Kresge Foundation grant to work with 6 of our colleges. And, there's three pillars to this work. If you're not familiar with it, it's, institutions, if they do this work, they need to map out their programs and focus on, obviously, jobs and continuing education for students as they map out their programs. But it's really about being more prescriptive with all of the programs that we offer within higher ed, the academic as well as the career and technical ed programs. And in many ways, it's bringing the thinking of career and technical education programs to academic programs and trying to lay out for students what their courses are going to be each semester, give them less choice, and keep them on that map of courses, if you will, so that they can progress more quickly and finish. And so that's a big piece of it. There's also a piece in here, and there's actually a little error in my slide, but the second piece of it is onboarding students into these programs of study. And then the third pillar of this work is tracking student progress and supporting student progress. And so we did this work with 6 of our colleges, and it at the end of the day, it proved to be overwhelming for them. I think it was so much change packed into one initiative, and really what they ended up focusing on was essentially mapping their programs, and they weren't able to do as much work on the other 2 pillars of this overall framework. And so one of the things that we learned here at the center out of that project was that the colleges oftentimes need a lot more sustained technical assistance and support to do this work. And so as we've pursued projects moving forward, we've really tried to build in not just exposure to the concepts and the ideas, which we've always done, but build in coaching and more sustained technical assistance and essentially support to the institutions over a longer period of time to actually do the work. And so we really like the guided pathways framework because it's powerful in terms of getting institutions to think about a broad range of things that they could be doing to support student success. It's not just looking at the academic programs, but it's thinking about how you help students make a choice on those programs. And then after that, it's supporting them to be successful in those programs. And that pretty much touches everything that our institutions do. And so it's a really powerful framework for reform at the institution level. And we didn't want to abandon it by any stretch. just because it was complex and long-term work. We sort of changed our approach to how we were going to support institutions to do it. And I will just note here on this last point on this slide that that project that we did in Arkansas actually inspired the AACC Pathways Project, which is a national initiative out of the American Association of Community Colleges. But they essentially used a lot of the same consultants that we had here in Arkansas, and got some Gates Foundation funding to roll this out with, I think they had a cohort of 75 institutions first time around, and maybe another 75 in their second cohort, and that work is still going on. Next slide, Terrence, please. So what we're doing now in terms of our approach to this work, still keeping guided pathways in mind in that overall framework, is we're pursuing it in pieces. And the pieces that we're sort of biting off, and some of these are, well, all of these are going to be familiar to most of you on the call, I think. All of these pieces, by focusing on the pieces, we're actually able to provide some more sustained technical assistance to the colleges and support them over a longer period of time, which again was one of the lessons that we learned in doing the guided pathways work initially. So we have a piece of this work going on with math pathways, and I think at least all of the public 2-year and 4-year schools are aware of that work. It's been supported by a substantial grant to the Dana Center at the University of Texas at Austin. And the center there has essentially been funded to work with us over the past 2 years in a very intensive way, work with our institutions through trainings, workshops. They support the task force that we created to lead this work, which the Department of Higher Ed is a part of and ACC is a part of. We have math faculty from every 2-year and 4-year public institution that's part of that task force for this initiative. The task force issued recommendations for scaling alternative math courses at our institutions. And we've even done some policy work with this initiative around the ACTS course transfer system and looking at what math courses should go with which majors, and made those recommendations as a part of the ACTS system. And we've been supporting particularly the 4-year schools to look at those recommendations and try and adopt the math courses that have been recommended for different majors. And we really focused on non-STEM majors in terms of those recommendations. And typically the math course that's being recommended is quantitative literacy instead of college algebra. But many of you are connected to this work and you're familiar with it. But again, it's a piece of guided pathways because you've got to get students in the right math course for their program of study, right? It's a piece of this larger work. And then we moved on to Strong Start to Finish, which y'all are involved in, at least the public institutions. We got some money from Governor Hutchinson to do that work. But that work really grew out of the math pathways work because one of the recommendations that the math faculty made was not only do we need alternative math courses for students, but we need co-requisite instruction for underprepared students, particularly for those math pathways, those math courses. And so we managed to get ourselves connected to the national initiative Strong Start to Finish, raise some money to participate in that. We're focusing on scaling of co-requisite instruction for math, but also English, because Strong Start to Finish, all of the states are working on scaling co-requisite instruction, and all of them are focusing on both math and English. So we had to roll the English into this work, but we were happy to do that. And so at this point, I think the institutions are putting together action plans for scaling co-requisite in math and English. We've got lots of technical assistance that we've built into that initiative, again, going back to the lessons that we learned with our early guided pathways work. And we're hoping to, well, we have funding to support institutions for the next 1.5 years in terms of technical assistance and training. And if we have to raise more funding, we can always do that. And then one of the other initiatives that we're working on right now, which I'm pretty excited about, is a holistic student support initiative. We got some funding from Ascendium Foundation. And this work really focuses on pillars 2 and 3 of the Guided Pathways framework, the onboarding of students into programs of study, and then tracking and supporting student progress. And so these colleges, we're working with 11 of our 2-year schools on this initiative. And, they're looking at reimagining advising, turning advisors into more of success coaches rather than folks that just help students pick classes. And they're looking at things like, how do we assess students' needs on the front end, broader than just academic needs, and then how do we tailor supports to meet those individual needs of students. They're looking at things like, how do we involve faculty in better supporting student success, and giving some guidance to faculty on how to do that. And so we're hoping with that work that, of course, our 11 colleges that are involved can work with the other 11 colleges that are part of our association and scale that work. The 4-year schools are not involved in that work. They are involved in the Math Pathways work and the Strong Start to Finish work. And that's one of the things that sort of happened with our center over the years is and I'm really glad about this, we've evolved into working more in partnership with our 4-year schools in some of these initiatives. And we're always open to working with our 4-year schools on any of these initiatives. And I'm glad again that that's sort of a trend that seems to be happening with the center's work here. So next slide, Terrence, please. So in terms of future projects, we have some on the horizon, and some that at least I'm thinking about and mulling over with some of the folks that I consult here on strategic planning. But one thing we feel pretty confident about is we're going to have hopefully some funding to extend the Math Pathways work for another 2 years and really support the institutions in continuing to make progress with that work. We know that they're adopting quantitative literacy courses. We know that they're gradually enrolling more students in those courses. But there's more work to be done there. There's more professional development for faculty around the content of those courses and how you teach them, and pedagogy and issues related to that. And then we also want to connect the Math Pathways work to the K through 12 world. And that issue has come up with our Math Pathways work. But we haven't really had time or resources to focus on trying to make that connection. So as we move this work forward, we want to try and connect to the K through 12 sector and think about, if we're going to have these alternative math pathways at the higher ed level, we obviously need to be thinking about those math pathways at the K through 12 level as well. One of the things that's on my radar screen, and I can share this report with you, I just read it recently. It's actually a fascinating report. It's called College on Purpose. And this is by Complete College America, and I guess it's part of their Game Changer series. But it really focuses on onboarding students into programs of study and doing it in the first year that a student is with us. And again, this is a part of the Guided Pathways work. It's one of their pillars, and it's difficult work. And we're getting at that with our holistic student support work with our institutions, but I think there's a lot more work that we can be doing with our institutions that focuses much more on this idea of helping students understand what careers are out there, helping them understand what they might be suited for in terms of careers, and then ultimately helping them pick a program of study that is suited for them. And I personally believe that's one of the best things that we can be doing for students to help student success. I saw it in myself, and I've seen it in other folks that I've known and students that I've actually taught, that once they figure out that they're going to college for a specific purpose to do some type of specific career eventually, light bulbs kind of come on and motivation goes up, and it's definitely a way to help students be successful if we can help them find a purpose and why they're going to college. And y'all know this. I mean, this isn't rocket science. But if you look at this report, they talk about, how do you change the admissions process to begin to talk about careers with students? How do you build in career assessments, interest assessments in the admissions and enrollment process at your institution? How do you redesign advising sessions so that you can talk about careers and programs of study? Do you want to put in place meta majors so you can start to, even though students might not have picked a major yet, you can start to channel them into a certain area, whether it's healthcare or whatever it might be, based on what their preliminary interests are. And then how can you sustain this kind of career choice support through student success courses? I've always believed that our student success courses are fantastic additions to what we do to support students, but I'm not sure that we focus enough on career exploration and career choice in the content of those courses. So it's things like that, and then it's getting students to pick a major by the end of their first year. But I think there's a lot of potential for the center to work with our colleges around that work, and I think it's as relevant to the 4-year schools as it is the 2-year schools, and you guys would probably agree. Some other work that we're thinking about pursuing in the future, I can share this report with you all too, and Terrence, I'll go ahead and give these reports to you guys, and you guys can send them out, so if people are interested, they can read them. But there's a whole body of work out there, and y'all are familiar with this, I'm sure, but it's looking at how higher ed needs to change to adapt to the changing economy and labor markets. And so I'm a part of a group that put together a working paper. It's people from University of Georgia system and folks from Oregon and all over the country, sort of higher ed thought leaders. Not sure how I got connected to the group, but anyway, I did. Glad to be there and learned a lot. But the group essentially put together a paper that talks about things like, higher ed needs to offer more short-term credentials and even more non-credit type training, and because workers need to come back and get new skills, right? And they sometimes don't need long-term degrees and don't have the time for that. But then all of this short-term training also needs to be stacked so that they can keep coming back and continuing their education. And these are ideas that have been around for a long time, but they're more important today maybe than they were 20 years ago. We need to be thinking about academic skills and technical skills, which we do well, but we also need to be thinking about how we can, through our curriculum, teach adaptive skills and soft skills, because many young people today are going to have more than one job, right? And may even end up changing careers 2 or 3 times throughout their lifetime. So we need to prepare students to be more adaptive and offer them skills that sort of can't be replaced by artificial intelligence or can't be replaced by routine factory sort of processes. It's greater employer involvement. It's in the design of all of our programs, and it involves there's a heavy dose of being really deliberate about career planning with students as well. It's a part of this work, and so that's an area I think that's rich for exploring with the center here and the work that we do with our institutions. We've made no commitments to move in any of these directions other than the math pathways and K-12 connection, but those are just some of the things that we're thinking about. And then we've got a student basic needs initiative that we're pursuing right now as well, and hopefully that will work out with the ECMC Foundation. But this one's really focused on food insecurity and trying to build food pantries on our college campuses to meet emergency food needs, but then also try and transition students into more long-term stable sources of food, the SNAP program, the food stamp program, and looking at ways to connect students to that, and also keep looking at the broader basic needs that students might need help with. So we're going to continue with that work too. So Terrence, next slide, please. So in terms of outcomes, I'll just say that we don't have as much hard data as we would like. And I'm actually a one-person shop here, so as you can imagine, I'm up to my ears in sort of running these initiatives and in partnership with our schools and raising new funds and bringing on new initiatives. And we always have an evaluation component to all of our initiatives, but I haven't been able to focus as much on gathering outcomes data, particularly across the state, and looking at to what extent we're moving the needle. I will say that if you look at a lot of the data from our colleges, the needle is moving on student success. The completion rates are creeping up. Gateway course completion is moving up in many places. So we're making progress and things are moving in the right direction. And I'm confident that the work that the center has done with our institutions is helping move those metrics. And you all know this too. I mean, institutional change takes time. It takes a lot of time. And it takes a lot of resources we've learned. And sustained support over time. But we feel like we've, at least with the center here, we've got a mechanism that can provide that support to our institutions over the long term and help them with this long-term journey. But getting back to hard outcomes, I mean, I don't have a whole lot to share here other than to say that we know some things have worked pretty well, and a lot of this is anecdotal evidence in large part. I mean, we heard that the English co-requisite, the ALP program, worked really well at our community colleges. And one of the things we're trying to do with Strong Start to Finish now is scale that work to more students. We've had other anecdotal evidence with different initiatives, whether it's the WSSN initiative, meeting students' basic needs. Institutions have said they've got data that shows that students are earning more credits and progressing and staying in school. With the intervention around Academy for College Excellence, the effective domain intervention that I discussed earlier. I mean, those institutions had a sense that was helping particular students. And any other initiative that we've done, we've heard from our institutions that there was some impact. But again, I don't have any hard data to share with you. I will say though that Math Pathways and Strong Start to Finish, we actually have a pretty extensive data gathering effort underway for evaluation purposes. Part of which we're required to do for some of those initiatives, but we've developed our own data framework for some of those initiatives as well, and we're starting to get good data coming in. Like around Math Pathways, we're starting to see the numbers of sections of quantitative literacy go up at your institutions. We're starting to see the math course that students take by their major is starting to change, and it's not so much college algebra, it's more quantitative literacy, which is great. The trend is moving in the right direction. And we'll be looking at things like grades, progression, credits earned, gateway course completion, all that's in there. And then the last thing I'll say about outcomes is that we've already had conversations with the Department of Higher Ed, and we're going to follow up on those conversations, and I'm actually going to be engaging some staff here at the association to help me with this work because I don't have a whole lot of extra time. But we're gonna start getting data from the department on a regular basis, probably fall and spring semester, on a whole range of metrics that are connected to student success and improve student outcomes. And so we'll start to get snapshots of whether things are moving in the right direction more than we've had in the past. And so I'll just say at this point with outcomes that we're focused more on it now than we ever have been, and we've got some good efforts in place to start gathering some more hard data on what impact we're having. But again, we know we're having an impact because we hear from our institutions that things are working for them. And I'm at least comforted by this idea that this is long-term work. Institutions that have done guided pathways work outside of Arkansas will tell you it's taken them 5 to 10 years to get to a point where they're starting to see major impact in terms of what's happening with students. And so we know this is long-term work. I feel good about the fact that we have a mechanism in place to support our schools to do this long-term work. And I'm optimistic that, we'll start seeing some more hard data in the years ahead. So, Terrence, I think that's the last slide. Yep, it's time for Q&A and discussion. And that's my contact information, obviously, in case anybody wants to follow up on anything.